Got it.
All right.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining our session this morning. This is the second year that the BSA is working with their recently formatted Design Awards program. So I know a lot of folks who submitted last year and were on that steep learning curve are back to learn more and do better this time around. And maybe for some of you, this is your first time working with the new submission criteria and guidelines. So welcome to all. Do you want to advance to the next slide, Wendy? We're going to walk through some of these topics. Wendy will take us through an overview of the awards, why they matter, what is different. She will walk through the components of submitting for the award. There will be a discussion of the Common App, which many of you are already familiar with, and some may have a lot to learn there. And then we're going to learn from two of our peers, Jonathan Schiffman at SOM and Stephanie Salzman at Brunner Cott, who have been successful in recent years in submitting for BSA Design Awards, followed by some Q&A. Meanwhile, during the course of the presentations, if you have questions, feel free to throw them into the chat. Marcia Miller and I will be monitoring that. And we'll try to interrupt tactfully when Wendy is speaking and moments where we think it's appropriate to ask a question here and there. And if we don't get to you, feel free to flag it for us or save it to the end. Well, that's me. I'm Kate Murphy. I'm the Director of Marketing at Goody Clancy. I'm one of the co-chairs of the BSA Marketing and PR Network. And Marcia.
I thought you were going to say my intro too. I'm Marcia, you guys. With you. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and, well, actually, I was going to introduce Stephanie, but since Jonathan's picture's first.
Yeah, let me go for it. Yeah. Jonathan Schiffman, really glad to have you with us. Jonathan is a communications specialist at SOM. His experience with project awards there runs pretty deep, both in his current role and in his prior role as a public relations awards communicator. He describes his approach to writing, and I should mention that Jonathan is also a freelance writer and journalist. He describes his approach to writing as being guided by three goals, which I love: keep it brief, make it clear, and be sincere. It's obviously working because the 2023 BSA Awards jury said of SOM's Excellence Award-winning submission, quote, "The project submission told the story of this complex renovation of Wellesley's Science Hub extremely well and hit all the design excellence objectives." Jonathan, welcome and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And Stephanie Salzman is the Manager of Marketing and Communications at Brunner Cott. Stephanie oversees the firm's brand identity, social media presence, website content, and media relations, in addition to supporting business development and proposal efforts. Most germane to this meeting, Stephanie has been helping Brunner Cott to rack up an impressive list of awards, including an outstanding 3 2023 BSA Design Awards, 1 Merit Award, and 2 Impact Commendations. I would also like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, I also wanted to introduce Wendy Pashwal. She's the project manager for housing innovation and awards at the BSA. In this role, Wendy works on the BSA's housing related work and has led the BSA's Future Decker project. In 2024, Wendy picked up the awards mantle as well and is leading us all through year 2 of the BSA Revamped Awards program. Wendy is a Housing Innovation Design Fellow, a role co-hosted by the BSA and the Mayor's Office of Housing, through which she explores ways in which housing design and policy come together. So now I'd like to turn it over to Wendy. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all. Thank you for the welcome and introductions. It's great to have you all on this call today. We had a great number for registrants, and so really excited to get this conversation going. I promise to be as brief as I possibly can, to leave as much room to both Jonathan and Stephanie to really go over their experience about what it was like submitting to last year's revamped Design Awards program, and also leaving some room and hopefully ample room at the end for questions, comments, and to really make sure that we're hearing from you all as you're starting to put together submissions. With that said, let's get started. So this is always an exciting slide to start on, I personally think, because we hear about what others have said. And so last year specifically, we heard from submitters, right, who mentioned that, maybe they didn't read the call for entries closely enough, and that they really stressed the importance of wanting clearer submission instructions, which was sort of really connected to also wanting to make sure that everything was in a single PDF. And so those are changes that we were able to make this year to really make it a little bit easier to really find the information and be able to quickly sort of understand how to go about this process. We also heard from submitters that they wanted design excellence to really be elevated. Last year, we had a process of sort of having the metrics go first, right, and really determine which projects ended up being reviewed by a design jury. And so this year, we wanted to make sure that we highlighted design excellence and really brought that to the forefront. And there was also a comment about how the comment app was a little bit tricky, not really knowing what information to put in. So we want to make sure to revisit that part of the conversation. Speaking of Common App, on the jury side, we heard that maybe it was a little bit difficult to sort of compare projects to one another because folks were able to essentially pick and choose which measures they responded to. And so we tried to streamline that a little bit this year. We also did hear that for them, it was helpful to have the metrics to really be able to sort of view the projects in a different light and see even how folks told the stories of their projects as well. And then the last comment that I'll highlight here from the jury last year was that they wanted to see even more creativity in the unbuilt project submissions, especially in the conceptual ones, right? These are projects that might never come to life. And so how do we sort of really welcome as many creative ideas as possible in this category that's meant to really incentivize creative thinking? And with that, I'll transition over to why the BSA Design Awards and why they matter. And so maybe this is something that many of you are familiar with, but the Design Awards program really allows us to have a platform to recognize the work of our community and their invested clients. And that work is also made by a diverse set of perspectives. And so we invite all size firms, small, medium, large, to submit all project types. Through that, we really hope to inspire creativity and innovation by really highlighting projects that are responding to sustainability concerns, that are reducing carbon emissions, and that most certainly are promoting healthy communities. And lastly here, really making and creating a platform and a space for us to imagine and build desirable futures through collaboration and experimentation as much as possible. So as Kate and Marcia mentioned, last year was a sort of revamp of the BSA Design Awards. So there were a lot of changes that took place for folks that had been submitting for previous years as well. So I'll just quickly go over, what those changes were, just so that everyone is reminded and caught up to speed. And so we eliminated the yearly cycles. There previously had been yearly cycles. And so now, all project building types can actually be submitted. We did restructure to have 3 main categories. And so that's built design excellence, small firms, and unbuilt planning and design as the 3 main categories. The former, so built design excellence and small firms, were actually previously considered, the honor award for design excellence. And so wanting to take that into account. Speaking of unbuilt planning and design, that sort of category does have 2 sort of project types that folks can submit to, which are conceptual projects, so really theoretical projects, and then also planning. And so those are projects that have been initiated, they've actually started. We also made sure to ask folks to submit project narratives, and so the big picture of their projects, and then how they address different levels of impact. We eliminated the Accessible Design Award and the Sustainability Award categories, which is not to say that we no longer care about these things, but that they're now incorporated into the entirety of the program, right? So they're essentially things that the jury would look out for, and really try to make sure to see, how does a project respond to those. There was the continuation of the use of the Common App, which is, the sort of main document is really provided and created by the code committee at AIA National, and then making sure that folks are able to tell their project sustainability story. And then also award levels. So we have the honor, which is the highest level of an award that one may receive. There's the merit, and then lastly, commendation. I will flag that last year we had impact advancement commendations, and there were like 3 tiers to them. This year, they're just commendations, and they are really, think of them as citations, right? In other chapters, you might see a citation. And so honor, merit, and commendation this year. We also have a 2-part jury. Sometimes we have described this as a 2-phased jury, but more so when for projects in the build, design, excellence, and small firms categories, we have a jury that is selected. And so think of that as a design jury. And that jury really reviews the submission portfolio, the project narrative. In parallel, we have a team that essentially looks at the metrics and then does an evaluation. And so I'll get into more of that framework later on in the presentation, but just wanting to know this 2-part jury. The last 2 here listed are the categories and number of awards. And so the number of awards granted it's at the sole discretion of the juries. And so juries may actually decide that awards may not be granted for every category or every concentration. And so that really is up to the jury to decide. And lastly here, we have resources and tools that are available on our website. And I'll share where those links are at the end of this presentation as well. So quick recap on the schedule for this year. So you might have seen this on our website, but the Design Award Submissions program opened on June 12th of this year. We'll be hosting, this is now the webinar, what submitters need to know. And then in August, we'll be hosting an office hours. And so we'll share out information about those office hours in the next couple of days through our currents and newsletters, et cetera, and just really highlighting that the submissions close on September 13th at 11:59 p.m. And so Eastern time. So please do make sure to submit them by that time. And then in the fall is when the jury deliberations will really take place. So once juries sort of meet, they will decide on the winners, and then we'll let folks know towards the very end of this year and early next year about what sort of categories they might have won an award in. And then the sort of event that we all look forward to will be the BSA Awards Gala, which will take place next February/March of 2025, which is really where we hand out the awards and get to celebrate and be with one another as well. So in terms of submission fees, I know that this is always also a helpful slide to really pause on. And so we have sort of varying fees for each of the categories, and also whether or not folks are BSA firm members, non-BSA members, and associate or AIA. And so I won't read all of these numbers out to you, but you can see that there's a sort of range, right? BSA members do pay a little bit less than non-BSA members. And this year, we also wanted to create a distinction between, what associate AIA folks would pay for the unbuilt architecture and planning category, and then also what students would be able to pay. And then I'll also note that for any of the student discounts, please send us a copy of your ID to our awards@architects.org email. Okay. So as I mentioned, there's been some changes over the last couple of years. This slide is really just to give a quick picture of what the Design Awards program looked like in 2022. We had a number of categories. There were also alternating year categories that would take place. And then last year was really this focus on these 3 main categories. So just a little visual to get us going. And now, thinking through the submission requirements, right? So again, this is, I'm gonna try and pause on this slide and the next couple of slides that really highlight the key sort of elements on what folks need to submit. I will also say this is on our website. We have done our very best to try to consolidate and put all of this information into a few PDFs. And so if you really want to sit through this information, please visit our website. But as a quick overview, so you'll submit your entrant information, firm name, submitter's name. At that very beginning, those things actually, it's for our viewing. And so just so that we know what firm is submitting, et cetera. You'll also submit the project information. So you'll select a division, right? The built design excellence, small firms or unbuilt. And then thinking through, this is specifically for the built design excellence and small firms category, the project eligibility. And so really stressing that a project needs to have been completed over the last 5 years. And so January 1st, 2018 to December 31st, 2023, we have had some questions come in about, what if we finished most of the project in 2023, but we only got, our certificate of occupancy in 2024. I think as long as most of the project has been done and completed by that date, we might be able to sort of make that consideration. But if any significant work has happened in 2024, please consider submitting next year. And then I'll go over into the urban design planning. It needs to be initiated or an incomplete project. So a significant portion of that project needs to have been completed, implemented, or adopted. In terms of eligibility, really stressing this year that projects by Massachusetts-based professionals / BSA members that may be elsewhere, those projects can actually be located anywhere. And then projects that are made by others, so non-Massachusetts-based professionals and non-BSA members, those projects must be located in Massachusetts specifically. You'll also be asked to upload a digital project portfolio, complete the Common App, upload the project narrative and images, project team credits. This is really important for us later down the line so that when we're creating the winners website, we don't have to ask you to submit all this information again, et cetera. And so having that earlier on is super helpful for us as well. And then project affirmations, submission, and payment. And then for the unbuilt category, really thinking somewhat similar. So you'll submit entrant information, firm name, submitter's name, membership, et cetera. The project information will include selecting the category, so conceptual or the planning. And so planning needs to be initiated January 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2023, again, 5 years. And conceptual, actually, no intent to build. And so whatever, essentially, the eligibility is the same. So projects by Massachusetts-based professionals / BSA members can be located anywhere, and projects by others must be located in Massachusetts. And conceptual, it can be located anywhere. You'll also upload digital project boards. You'll upload project narratives and images. You will share project team credits, affirmations, submissions, and later payment. I'll also flag that payment only needs to take place at the very end. So when you're ready to submit, so you can actually go back to, you can start a submission, leave it there, come back to it. And then when you're ready to submit, that's when you'll need to make the payment. Okay, so hopefully some of you have been on our platform. So our open water platform. And so this is where you actually put in the submissions. We're hoping to include some visuals here just so that you're familiar and that things, you can sort of use this as a tutorial later on to some extent. So there will be a very big, you can begin submitting here, and that will take you to either create an account or log in if you've previously used this platform with us. And so after that, so once you start working on a submission, it'll either say status complete, or it'll sort of be in progress. And so you'll be able to really take a look at all of your submissions, especially if folks are submitting more than one submission. And then for the entrant information, right, you can manage your collaborators, there's a character count as well. And then being able to sort of include that information. You'll see more on that later on. The division is what I was mentioning earlier, right? So the divisions are categories, our three main categories. So build design excellence, small firms, unbuilt planning and design, and you'll select that. And depending on what you're submitting, the sort of questions will also change and alter. So this is just the sort of overview of what those main categories are. And we say that's for the build design excellence in the small firms. And small firms, our definition is 10 employees or fewer in a specific firm. So you are likely to submit common app metrics and narratives with that. But for unbuilt planning and design, it's not required. For small firms, we strongly encourage that you submit that, but it's also not required that you submit the common. And then, right, once you select the division, whether it's build design excellence in small firms in this case, you'll also be able to select a project type. So to let us know, is this an educational facility? Is it housing? Is it adaptive reuse? And one of the reasons why we kept the sort of category or the project types in this sense is that folks had mentioned previously that they didn't want, if they're submitting a housing project, to have it be compared to a commercial building, right? And so making sure that even the jury is aware that when they're looking at a project, they know what the project type is. And if you don't see a project type that is specific to your specific submission, please feel free to select other, and then you can also specify what building typology that is so that the jury is also later aware. I will also say that for the Common App, as I mentioned, Build Design Excellence, it is required that you sort of complete at least or fill out 2 of the measures. So measure number 1 and measure number 2. Last year, we had asked folks to fill out 3 measures, but we really realized that a lot of folks were either struggling to find metrics and trying to source that. We do ask that you do submit, even if it's a little bit of information, right, to just put something in the sheet so that any information is really helpful for the jury to get a bigger picture as to what that metric system is or what the project is about. And so, yes, but we did decrease from 3 to 2 measures to be completed this year. And then in terms of the unbuilt planning and design, so you can select either planning or conceptual, as I mentioned, and follow the sort of eligibility requirements as well. So the project narrative, this is something that is really helpful for the jury to really be able to determine what story is the project telling, what are the things that the folks submitting really want the jury to pay attention to call out. And so we do ask that folks submit 250 words maximum in that project narrative. Please conceal or omit all references to the firm or architect, right? So when the jury reviews this, they do not see what firm submitted or who the client was in this case. So they're only looking at the building form or what the project specifically is, to really make sure that they're not biased, that they maybe haven't seen the project, or if they've seen it, right, that they can really separate that and compartmentalize a little bit more or as much as possible. So please do make sure to conceal or omit all references to the firm or architect in the project narrative. You would upload that as a Word document, and then same as the one that you use in your digital project portfolio. And this narrative, as I mentioned, is really that big picture, right? So what are the concepts? What are the program elements? What were the lessons learned? And then think also about an impact area. So, how does this respond to the society or the environment that the project is located on? Does it use any interesting sort of technology? Are there sustainability elements to really be considered? How is the building accessible? That sort of thing to really help shape the narrative. And then, yeah, we ask that you please use the framework metrics, if applicable, to also support your narrative. And then when it comes to the project portfolios, or, I think a lot of the sort of designers and architects in the space will think about this as boards. For the built design excellence and small firms, please do not include the projects category. It shouldn't also be longer than 10 pages. You may upload this as a PDF, and it needs to be 25 megabytes or less. You can also see, the sort of method of how to name the project. I won't fully read this out loud, but it also shouldn't be longer than 60 characters. You'll include images and plans with captions. You'll also include that project narrative that we were talking about earlier. That's no longer than 250 words. And again, please do not include firm or client name. And then on the other side of that coin, for the unbuilt category, no more than 3 20 by 20 boards. And then that will also be uploaded as a PDF. It shouldn't be longer than the 25 megabytes. The project file name would be similar, including images and plans, the project narrative, and again, not including the client name or the firm name. I will also say the Common App is always an interesting one. This is a sort of method that is adopted by numerous AIA chapters across the US. And so, as many of you know, the AIA sort of framework for design excellence is something that really allows, or is a framework that helps support how we look at buildings and other projects that have come into the world. And so being able to actually look at it from a holistic standpoint, not just, what sort of metrics and sustainability that are coming about, but even thinking about social responsibility, thinking about impact in neighborhoods, et cetera. And so we adopt the Common App worksheet for our built design excellence in small firms. And like I said, it's required for built design excellence, optional for small firms, and not required for unbuilt planning and design. But this worksheet you'll find linked on our website. You will download that as a Excel file, and then each of these submissions will be reviewed by this technical jury or jury group, and then within the project types. Again, all information should be anonymous, the project name _ Common App, just so that we can, it'll all be uploaded together, but in case folks are downloading that and reviewing multiple so that they know exactly what to go back to. And then we say, you don't need to address all of the measures, at least 2 out of the 10. And so I said 2 of the measures are actually required for the built design excellence. But we really do stress that if you have any information to add to the Common App, please don't leave it as blank, right? It helps build that bigger picture. And also for the jury, they can look at it and sort of say, okay, even if it's not complete, we can see, how that project is really impacting its environment. And this is essentially what it looked like. It has looked like the one on the left in the past. And then the one on the right, you can see that these are sort of screenshots from what that spreadsheet looks like. And I'll actually leave it to Jonathan and Steph to actually go over their own experiences about what it was like using the Common App worksheet and how they went about it for last year's program. And then in terms of the submission requirements for the images, we do say and ask to conceal or omit all the references to the architecture firm or architects on all of the materials. And so including these references actually could disqualify your submission. And so just really wanting to be aware of that. You can submit 10 images maximum, 5 minimum. You can upload them as a TIFF file or a JPEG, about 2,000 pixels wide, 300 dpi minimum. And then the name of the image files themselves will be the sort of project name, photographer name. Please, please, please include the photographer name. Like I said, this is really helpful for our communications afterwards as well. I think we have to track down some photographer names for another award last year. And so please make sure to include that. We want to make sure that we give the right credit to folks and submit in order of preference and publication. And then if there is no photographer, please do credit the image to the firm or the appropriate party as well. And then the project team credits. So please feel free to sort of list, right, and this will be at the sort of beginning, list names as firm name, first and last name, contact, separate each name with a semicolon and a space, like the example that you see on the screen here. You may separate each email address with a semicolon and space, and then if not applicable, please enter none. I will also stress that if you have worked on a project with another firm or another entity, please make sure to include that, sort of earlier on as well, and to really highlight that so that we want to make sure that we give the right credits to everyone who participated in a project. And we want to see more collaborations. And so collaborations are great. We just want to make sure that we credit everybody. Thank you. And now sort of back to the submission platform and thinking about review and checking out. This is what it will most likely look like. You will put the submission in your cart, right? And then once you're ready to submit, you'll actually be able to see the cost of that submission. And then you actually have the option to either make another submission, or you can check out in that moment and then make the payment before submitting. And then you can also sort of see, right, especially if you're submitting multiple, you can see, payment not received for maybe a submission that you're still working on, or the one that you have paid for, and there's an invoice number, and all of that information is also shared with you. So if you have any issues sort of navigating this, please do reach out to us and we can do our best to answer any questions related. The jury and awards process. This is something that we also made a slight adjustment from how it unfolded last year. And so this year, we sort of have said two-phase jury, but really it's a two-part jury because we're assembling our sort of team right now of the design jury. And so that will be a small cohort of individuals located across the country who will be able to review the projects and get together to actually determine who the winners are, et cetera. And then in tandem with that will be the technical review. So we'll have another group really review the sort of key metrics, review the common app, the framework narratives, and those sort of reflections will be combined. And ultimately, this design review team will look at those metrics or the evaluation from the technical jury team, and then actually be able to determine what the awards are, right? Whether a project should receive an honor award, merit award, or a commendation, also known as a citation. So really wanting to stress that process. And this will be specific to the built design excellence of small firms. And for unbuilt, we have a group that really does that, reviews the digital boards, the narrative, and then issues those awards as well. And then in terms of our resources and FAQ, and I will make sure to also follow up with everyone over an email, especially to the folks who have attended today's webinar, to really share these links. So the first link that you see here on the top left is to our FAQ page. And so there are many, many, many questions. We can also keep building the FAQ page. So any of the questions that you submit in the chat, I'm seeing Kate's sort of message here in the chat about please feel free to type in any questions. So any of those we can add to the FAQ page just so that, it's sort of like a living document is what we'll describe it. And so that can keep growing, especially because we want to really be clear with folks about what the process is like, et cetera. And then there's also a couple of sort of links related to the AI framework for design excellence. So that's really connected to the Common App. So if you want to learn more about that, we do have that as a resource. And then also the BSA Committee on the Environment, which talks a little bit about, the sort of like environmental implications, and then the Common App, and et cetera. And I believe with that, I will pause and I will pass it over to Jonathan, who will talk a little bit about last year's submission process.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so this picture that you see here, this is the Wellesley College Science Complex, which actually was a very complicated project. It's both a renovation and a new addition to the college's science facilities. And the reason we submitted it is because there's like storylines that resonate, because for these awards, you really have to ask yourself, how's this project improving people's lives? How's it making the world a better place? And at Wellesley, what we did is we took this outdated science center, vastly improved the student experience, and also at the same time, it had been one of the most energy intensive buildings on campus, and we turned it into a LEED Platinum building. You could go to the next slide. So one of the main parts of these awards, as you've heard, and really for most AIA awards for that matter, is the Common App, which, as you know, it's the 10 measures, and the data you provide generates an overall score, which you can see an example of that on the right. For the short responses, I'd always recommend, you have to use it to explain the data's context, be very clear, very concise, and be specific. Don't necessarily say, oh, this is like an innovative idea. Just tell me what the idea is. How did you save water? How did you save energy? How did you engage the community? Um, and yeah, I'd recommend starting on this immediately, determine which questions you can answer. Ideally, you want to submit a project where you can answer as many of the metrics as possible. And sometimes you have to send portions of the spreadsheet to consultants. Maybe you have to send, portion of it to like, the MEP engineer or something like that. So you want to make sure whoever you need to loop into the process is looped in early. And yes, don't hide facts. If you have information, you put it in there because it generates at least some score and not no score for that category. Um, but of course, if something's not applicable, you could say so. And you take some solace, I think, too, in that like not every winning project scores high in every category. But I have a feeling that as just like architecture continues moving in a more sustainable direction, a lot of these scores will like start to rise over the years to come. You could go to the next slide. Yeah, so of course the other big part of this award submission is the PDF, which I mean think of it basically as a booklet explaining the design. You start, with the project overview. You have like the full bleed hero shot as your first page. This is your introduction to the whole thing. And then at least the way we tend to go about them, and on the next slide you will see like how we put that into practice for Wellesley. Then you like step back, take kind of like this macro view of the project. Maybe this is where you put a site plan, maybe you have an aerial photo. You show like the exterior, what people are going to see when they approach the building. Then often as a transition to the interiors, we'll put, a photo of the entrance. And then when you're organizing the pages for the interior of the building, my recommendation is to think of yourself, how would you give a tour of the building? Imagine giving a tour of the building. That's pretty much what you should do. So you have like, the from the entrance, to the lobby, and you walk through all the spaces, make sure to include all the main signature interior spaces. And then if you have any, you know, renovation portions to this building, try to have a before and after. And sustainability, because that is increasingly important in AIA submissions, and make sure that you include something on there. Maybe if you have a diagram that you can use, something that explains how to achieve LEED silver, LEED gold, LEED platinum, etc. You can go to the next slide. So here's that whole approach put into practice. You could see page one, we have that first full bleed hero shot, and then we go to the project overview, where you see another one of our like main photos that really display the architecture. Then we zoom out, take that macro view, take that look at the aerial building, the aerial view of the building. Then we go into the floor plans, then the photo of the entrance, then some of the interior spaces. And on that page, we took a quote from the press, talking about the building and how it's used, and that helped bring something different to like a third party, testimonial to the project. And then those pictures that you see on page 6, those are all part of the new addition, as well as the transition from the new addition of the building into the renovated portion. So then on page 8, you see, the before and after. I know it's a little hard to see because these are thumbnail images, but it's showing what this classrooms look like before, what the laboratories look like before, and what they now look like after. And then page 9, we got into sustainability. And then page 10 is actually, as you go through the whole building that we showed, this is coming out on the other side of the renovated portion. And I believe those are all our slides.
Thank you, Jonathan. And with that, I'll pass it over to Stephanie to talk a little bit about her experience.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Wandy. So I'll just give you guys a 10-second intro to Brunner Cott. If you aren't familiar with us, we're a mid-sized single office practice. Our office is near the Garden, North Station area in Boston. Been around for 50 years, celebrating our firm's 50th anniversary last year. And we specialize in, the reuse and preservation of existing historic buildings, higher education facilities, sustainable and regenerative design, cultural facilities, and urban housing. So just a little bit about us. We can move on. All right, so here is kind of a list of Brunner Cott's award success in recent years. Award submissions are one of the things I like most about my job. I think they're kind of fun. They're like little projects, and it's a really great opportunity to learn about the work that your firm does. As a marketer, I'm obviously not involved in designing buildings, but I'm still very impressed at what my colleagues come up with. The AIA and BSA Design Awards are really important to our firm. I think they're a really impactful way to communicate our commitment to design excellence and just kind of reinforce the great work that my colleagues do. So we really do prioritize BSA and AIA awards in our firm. And especially over recent years, they've become very closely aligned, basing everything on the AIA framework for design excellence. And I think that's been really helpful. There's almost like a trickle over effect. Submitting for some helps you think about or frame your process for submitting for others. So we really enjoy submitting for these. With every one of these submissions, our process changes a little bit, as does the awards process. Obviously, we're talking about changes to the BSA awards for this year. So it's always important to pay attention to those and just kind of be nimble and be adaptable. And then also keep in mind what you don't see on this list are all of the projects that we submitted that didn't win awards. And there are quite a few of them. So, it's impressive when you can list everything together, but some years are better than others. Some projects do better than other projects, have a stronger story. But the point is we enjoy submitting for awards. We think there's incredible value in them. And even when we don't win, we always learn something. Go to the next slide. So I'm a very process-oriented person. So for me, awards is all in the preparation, starting early. Jonathan alluded to this as well, and I think that just shows it works. The earlier you start, the more time you have to work with your material and refine and really put together the best submission. I love that quote, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And I think that's so true with these awards. Without kind of having a good process in place, it can almost feel like a school project that you didn't tell your mom you needed a poster board for until the night before, and you're up all night doing it. Maybe some of you have kids that you're dealing with that now. But that's kind of what it feels like when you're rushing at the last minute to meet a deadline that you weren't prepared for. So for us, we start early on. I use Excel to track all my deadlines. I personally like that, but as a team, we've started using Asana. It's Google's project management platform. There's a free version of it, but it's a really great way to visually see your deadlines, assign tasks to people. You can set priority levels for different awards or different initiatives. You can provide feedback within the app and share materials. So we found that it's been helpful. We're still learning and ironing out our process, but in terms of keeping people on the same page, especially visual people, which cover a lot of my colleagues and myself, for instance, it's a really great tool. So we kind of try to stay nimble and use, the tried and true, the Excel. It's not going anywhere, but working in new platforms. But the biggest takeaway is just making sure that whoever's involved in the process is on the same page. Everything is organized in a way that makes sense to your team, and you're ready to go. You can go to the next slide. So something about our firm, obviously we are smaller, about 30 people, which means our marketing team, I like to joke, it's about 1.5 people. It's myself and one of our managing partners who, in addition to overseeing our marketing and business development stuff, runs the firm. So she has a lot on her plate. So I rely really heavily on our technical staff in the office, as well as outside consultants. And I think Jonathan said this as well, especially MEP engineers are really valuable in energy data and some of the things that, you might not have within your files. So really tap into your consultants. I'm sure that they're happy to help and kind of sharing the recognition as well when a project wins. But working with the architectural staff has been really beneficial for our firm. I think when I started doing the award submissions, I was doing a lot by myself, thinking I was bothering people by asking for help or asking them to look at things, because everyone's busy doing billable work, right? Well, turns out that's not the case, and they're actually very excited to help. There's a lot of value in that. It helps foster a sense of pride in the work that they just did. If you're working with a project team, and they get to kind of really reflect on what they just finished, as they're probably also churning and working on the next building. They learn a little bit about what the marketing corner of the office does, and I think that that's just really healthy overall for our office culture. We all kind of understand what we do, and there's a mutual respect there. For me, we get to flex a little bit of management muscles. I obviously don't manage a team, so I manage processes and I work with different people. So that's something that I think has been valuable personally in my professional growth. And then, winning, there's a shared sense of accomplishment and pride, and I think that that's really valuable as well. So with the Common App, what we have found successful in with the AIA Awards and the BSA Awards, the COAT Award, for instance, has this super spreadsheet that's really robust. We assign it to our project managers. We kick off our kind of award submission process early, and I kind of do a little intro on how awards work for those that don't know. And then project managers are pretty responsible for owning the Common App information. And from there, excuse me. So they kind of take a first stab at it, and I help support their process, but they also work with their principals in charge. So that's a good opportunity for them as well to kind of work with leadership. Some feedback from our staff was that they liked doing that. It gave them a chance to kind of reflect on their work with their superior. And I think that, again, that's just, I keep saying valuable, but it's just so true. And then the visual component of it, We also rely on technical staff. We'll kind of take an inventory for every project that we're submitting, what we have for photos, what we have for diagrams and plans, what we need, and then set a game plan from there. We try and think about these visuals throughout the design process, you know, as the designs unfold and we kind of start to formulate these stories. And especially in the photography round, when you are finished with the project, think about the story you're telling in your award submissions or in your PR initiatives, or, you know, wherever this project will go, and try and capture visuals that will help support that. And I guess lastly on this, we have co-ops from Northeastern that join us for 6 months at a time, and the co-ops really enjoy participating in award submissions. It gives them a little room to kind of flex their creative muscles. They get to learn about our projects really intimately. So it's a good experience for them, and they enjoy doing it, and they get to work with different staff in the office. So it works very well for me because I have help on these big lifts, and they benefit as well. Next slide. And I guess one of the most important things is just leaving time to sit with your work, and don't rush to submit, I guess. It's really important for us to leave enough time in our process to, you know, to pin up our slides. Jonathan's slide was much cleaner in the way he talked through walking you through a building. We try and take the same approach. And, you know, with every project and every team, it's a little bit different. For instance, with Frost Terrace, the Yellow House project, that we left up on a wall for about a week or so, and would kind of keep coming back to it and moving things around until we felt, you know, confident with it. Below that, we've used Miro boards. Those are really valuable. People can collaborate in real time. And that was really helpful for our Speedway project because it has multiple buildings, and it was hard to keep track of which photos went with which building and existing conditions and all of that. So that was an important tool for us. Or Masmoka over on the right, we spent a lot of time specifically on the order of that portfolio and making sure that from a jury perspective, the story made sense. And something that we did too is invite other people from the office who weren't helping with the award submission to come and let us know what their impression is. You know, someone who doesn't have the context and isn't working with it very intimately, do they get it? Are we doing our jobs right? So yeah, saving time to kind of visualize everything and just wrap up your final package rather than like sprinting at the deadline is key for us. But yeah, that's really it. So my best tips for surviving this award season: take a proactive rather than a reactive approach where you can. It does pay off in the long run. Your prep is incredibly important, and just keeping everybody on the same page and having a process and understanding all of the expectations and deadlines and criteria is just incredibly important. Involve your technical staff early. You're not bothering them. They're excited to help, even if they're very busy. And overall, I think you'll find you have a better product in the end. Own your process, flex your management muscles in your firm. You know, you have put all this time into your prep and you know what to expect at this point. So own it. Embrace the learning opportunities with every submission. There are plenty. Take jury feedback, you know, ask for feedback where you can. Something too, we resubmit projects that don't win. You know, revise and resubmit. You can always revisit if it's within the eligibility window. You know, juries change, processes change. So just because a project wasn't successful one year doesn't mean you don't have another chance to submit it and get it recognized. And then my favorite is KISS, keep it simple, is one of my favorite quotes. I have it on a sticky note. It's just a very simple, helpful reminder. It's very easy to overcomplicate these processes, but if you just keep in mind your big picture and your overall story, just put time in your prep and stay true to your process, I think you'll find success. And that's it.
Thank you both. That was super helpful. I feel like personally, I also end up learning a lot in hearing about how submitters from previous years sort of went about the process, put together materials, what questions came up, and how they resolved some of those as well. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'll ask Marcia and Kate to support me in sort of running this Q&A session that we're about to embark on. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that we can look at each other and yeah, be in the space. So feel free to raise your hand, go off mute, whichever one.
Thank you, Wandy. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much.
I have questions, but I don't want to go first and cut somebody else off. I had plenty of time already. So does anybody have anything they want to throw out there?
I just have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you. That was an amazing presentation, especially Jonathan and Brunnercott, the woman from Brunnercott. Wow, it's very impressive. Just regarding the small firms, my firm has 4 people in it. So is that submission more like a traditional submission like we used to do a million years ago? Is that you have a 250 word narrative and then the images and then whatever other information you have? Is that sort of summarize what's in that, or is there something more complicated? The Common App obviously seems, for a small firm, it's quite extensive.
Yeah, I know I've sort of hesitated. I wanted to ask, what do you mean by traditional? So that is a really helpful clarification. And I would say that that's correct, right? So essentially it's just submitting as much information about the project as you possibly can, but that the project narrative, the boards or the portfolio that you submit with it is what the jury would be looking at. So we hope that it is significantly easier to sort of go about that. We know that smaller firms might not have a marketing team. And so putting together that those materials can be a little bit tougher. So we're mindful of that and yeah, did our best to try to make it as easier as possible.
So we don't have all these matrices, as you call them, right?
Right. So the Common App would not be a requirement for the small firms. So you wouldn't have to submit that like metrics data for sustainability or that sort of thing. If you're able to, it would be great, but it's not a requirement. So
Got you. Okay, thank you so much.
I have to say my tolerance for awkward pauses is about 3 seconds if I really strain. So I'm just going to keep making noises until somebody else raises their hand. Well, let me ask a question then, because that was 2 seconds. Wandy, I think this is a question for you. And I don't know that it has an easy answer. It has to do with very early on in the application process, selecting the right category. This is something in my firm particularly came up with against last year when we were trying to decide whether we should try to, stick a project into the all-encompassing education category, which seems just incredibly broad to me, or whether we should submit it in the adaptive reuse / renovation / historic preservation category, which is very broad in its own way. Any tips for how to decide where to put a project if it qualifies under multiple categories?
Love the consideration that, right, and that's true. I think anything can fall under multiple project types at once. And so that's very fair. I think my gut reaction actually is to say, what is the narrative or what is the story that you're hoping to tell with that particular project? And then which project type will respond or uplift that in a better sense, right? So if you really want to focus on the adaptive reuse components, because that's where your innovation came in, that's where your team spent the most amount of effort into, that's where everyone was really excited about the project in, then I think that I would sort of like lean on following in that project type. Whereas, if the programmatic elements for education were really the driving force of it, and then I would sort of say, right, steer in the sort of educational component. But I would say that this is actually an incredible question, because I think that it might actually require folks to, or invite folks to consider the project narrative before even starting the submission, right? So that you could actually start that writing process and be, what is the story that I want to tell? And then go into the open water platform and say, I feel like this would be a better fit in this project type because it aligns better.
Well, I'm disappointed because I was hoping you were going to pass out some kernel like, the adaptive reuse category is really slender. But what you described is exactly how we made our decision. So I guess I'm happy about that.
That's great.
Anybody else? I'll just keep asking them. That was 3 seconds. Wandy, I've got a question for you, and it has to do with concealing client information. I don't think you mentioned it, so I'm assuming there's no need to do that. In past award seasons, it has been imperative that we, for example, Photoshop out the big Boston University across the front of a building in order to keep that information confidential.
Yes, please do conceal it. Thank you for lifting this back up. Yeah, no, please do conceal MAID in the like project portfolio and that sort of thing. The only place that we ask you to actually let us know what some of those things are on the platform when you're typing in the different sections, because that's for us internally to be able to then say, this firm worked on this project in this neighborhood, that sort of thing. But I would say that in your portfolio, in your narrative, yeah, please. And I'll share the slides after as well. We'll send it out through our comms. And, we have a lot of sort of notes about please omit. We do not want the jury to be biased in their decision, and we don't want to have to disqualify folks either for adding that information in. So please, please. Yeah.
On that topic, then, if there's a giant sign on the front of the building that, for example, says Boston University, should we actually be going in and photoshopping that, or are you going to give everybody a pass who's not that skilled with Blur Tool or whatever it's called?
That's a great question. I think that I would say that if it really is right, you can, to that extent, you're sort of describing something that is like a key design element of the project itself. Signage also can act in that form. And so I think sometimes you can't get away with omitting that, but wherever you can, please make sure to do that. But if it's like a very large, right, sign that says the client name, I mean, yeah, that's a part of the building at that point.
Right.
No other questions?
Well, I've got tons. I've got a reservoir.
I know, I was gonna say, I feel like we have such a great turnout of folks that I'm so curious, even if they're not submission specific questions, right? I'm also hoping that this is just a space where they can be comments as well.
I've got a question, Wandy. In past years, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the answer. I think you've told me before in conversation. In past years, the BSA has had like a chunky folder full of past award-winning submissions that you could go and flip through at the BSA, physical copies. Is the BSA going to make available successful award submissions in some format?
That is a great question. So, for this year, and I will definitely get to your question in a quick second. So I know that last year we had the sort of winning award submissions and folks could look at it. It's a digital format now. I think that we were trying to actually still look through last year's to see if folks were okay with having their information shared, because that was one of the key points. So we'll have a final answer in a couple of weeks regarding that for this year. But in this year's submission, we actually there's like a checkbox essentially that folks would
Right.
click to say, yes, I would be open to having my information shared if my project wins for next year, if folks are submitting. So for future, yes, we're still deciding on this year's.
But we all screen grab Jonathan's, so Jonathan, no need to share yours. Oh, there's a question in the chat for you. Will asks, we don't ever, it's a clarification on that client name question. We don't ever mention the client/building name. So if it's, for example, the Boston Public Library, we should not mention or show that.
Not in the project narrative or the portfolio, but certainly in the open water platform, right? So in the platform, when you're filling out your name, the client name, your collaborators' names, all of that, yes, but not in the materials that will be shared with the jury, which are the project narrative and the submission portfolio.
Okay. Will, is that clear? Shout if it isn't. All right. I'm
Hi,
sorry.
can you hear me? Hi,
Yes.
Kate. It's Alexandra. Can you hear me? Great. Sorry. I just have a quick question, a quick clarification question with that. So in the project narrative, how do you want us to call out the project? So like, for example, if it is the Boston Public Library, you don't want us to mention that. Should we just keep saying like the project, this, how do you want us to call that out then?
Great question. It's one of the better questions. And also apologies for not including this in the slides. Last year we had some incredibly creative alternative names, and so that's essentially what we ask folks to do. Come up with a funky, a cool, a different name. It can also just be library, right? You could just say this library was that. We'll know what the project type is. We'll see it in the floor plans. It makes sense. But if you want to get creative with an alternative title of the project, that would also be great.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Well, that's intriguing. I really want to know what those funky, cool names were now.
So I think that answers Will's question in the chat. So what is the project name then, right? Will?
Will types, yes, thanks. Good. Okay, good. Well, I guess I have a question for Jonathan and Stephanie, and it's a process question. And you both spoke a lot about process in your presentations, which I found very helpful and inspiring. And my question has to do with, it's actually a question about the balance of graphics and images. And I think both of your presentation demonstrated a really excellent use of very clean, crisp graphics that describe a project. Do you have any, I don't know, do you want to talk at all about how you collaborate with team members and at what point there's a realization in each of your firms that like a graphic is needed? Are those things that are produced during the design process and then get refined in awards? Or do you wind up having a lot of work to do in that regard when it's award season?
I think for us, I mean, floor plans, we often, those are produced during the design process, and then we kind of finalize them after when the building is complete, make them presentable for awards and, any press that might ask for them, or even on our website. And in terms of graphics, like we had that sustainability graphic, which was a diagram that was actually created during the design process, and it was very usable for the awards. And then to talk about like the balance between graphics and photos, yeah, balance is the word there. You try to make images do as much of the talking as possible. And also just to, you think about like your audience, probably learning about the building for the first time. So you want to make it very clear and, as you said, very crisp and try to, I think, create like a balance between, full bleed picture, then you have, maybe like smaller pictures, a grid of images, or a diagram alongside a photo, then you go back to full bleed, and just like creates visual variety and helps keep things interesting.
Mhm.
Stephanie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, truly, I would echo what you just said. Starting at the beginning, a lot of, the more basic, applicable to every project, like floor plans, building sections, those things do come about in the design process and get cleaned up along the way. Something that's helpful for us is our firm does something called Third Thursdays. So the third Thursday of every month, we gather and we talk about a different project. And so teams in, preparation for these internal events, it's easy for me attending them to see kind of what exists for each project as we learn about it and we learn about the story. So I kind of take some internal notes there, and then I'll connect with the project teams afterwards and ask, what was that great diagram you had to talk about this project, or things like that. So just paying attention during the design process, and then as projects start to come to a close, we have a basic checklist of, floor plan sections, things like that, and then sustainability diagrams, or if it's a reuse project, like before and after site plans or anything that shows significant interventions, program diagrams. So there's kind of, you have your core graphics and then your specialized graphics that support the greater story. And then I would also, again, like echo Jonathan, we rely heavily on like the show, don't tell. Really let the images tell your story. On a good balance of photos and graphic, like diagrams or plans. They complement each other very well. And I think it's important to try and think about your user and kind of balance the more technical with, the lighter, more emotional, resonating imagery. I think that can be really powerful.
Mhm. Great, thank you. Marcia, keep us honest.
Yeah, it's 9:30. So thank you guys so much for attending, and Randy and Jonathan and Stephanie, we really appreciate all your input and insight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all
Thank
for
you.
being here.
Thanks.
A look out for our office hours for August, if there's any additional questions too.